Hi all, I wanted to do a standalone video on avoiding plagiarism because it's so important. So let's take a quick peek at page 85 in the Stylebook, which starts our discussion on avoiding plagiarism. So it's really important this semester that we are very, very careful not to plagiarize from our sources. So plagiarizing from a source happens when we take its words or ideas and we do not clearly reference the source where they came from. So there's a lot of different ways it can appear, which I will talk about, but I want you to be very clear on what plagiarism is, how to avoid it, and the possible consequences of plagiarism in Comp 2. So as it tells us in the Stylebook right here, plagiarism actually comes from the Latin word meaning to steal. So plagiarism is a very serious form of cheating that involves presenting the ideas or words of another as your own. That includes, but it's not limited to, copying from portions of work or an entire work, such as an essay, passages from a work, or sentences or sentence structures from a work without getting credit to the author or citing that source with an appropriate citation style. So you should always be able to prove in any of your classes, but especially in Comp 2, that this work is yours and was produced by you and belongs to you. One way that you can do that is by preserving your drafts and preserving your notes and your research processes. So I would highly advise that every time you revise a draft of your essay, you save as a new copy and don't write over your old draft, because that way, if there were to be a question about the originality of your work, you can show the teacher the progression of your writing and the progression of your ideas. It's very rare that a student suddenly appears with a fully formed final draft and no sort of pre-writing or drafting up until that point that shows a process. So do make sure you save everything as you're working on your essays, just in case there would be any question about the intellectual property. So plagiarism can be unintentional or intentional. And as a teacher, I think the most frequent type of plagiarism I see is actually unintentional plagiarism that occurs when a student simply forgets to cite a source. But it can also be very intentional. I've certainly had many instances of students who downloaded essays from a site, who got an essay from another student, or who were just straight up copying and pasting things from the internet or from other sources into their paper. Plagiarism does sometimes involve copying word for word or paraphrasing, and in this day and age, it often involves copying and pasting. And again, the burden of proof is on a student when it comes to plagiarism. So if there's ever a question, about the where your writing came from, and again, this is in any class, not just in Comp 2, the burden of proof is on you to prove that you wrote it. Okay, so make sure that you leave yourself some evidence of that writing process. So how does plagiarism appear in an essay? Well, it appears maybe when we forget to include quotation marks around direct wording. Even if you cite that, that's still considered plagiarism if you didn't use quotation marks to show that it was word for word. If you simply, as I mentioned in the last video, replace some words with synonyms or maybe flip the sentence structure a little bit, that's probably not enough. It's also plagiarism if you use the organization, idea progression, or other features of a source without citing it. So for example, let's say you look up a database source about a book that you read, and it talks about the themes, the motifs, and the symbols. And then in your essay, you go through and copy that exact progression of ideas with some of the same evidence. You're definitely dancing with plagiarism at that point. So it's easy to imagine how plagiarism can be intentional, right? Like, I copied this essay, I pasted it into a document, and I submitted it. That's really obvious plagiarism. But unintentional plagiarism can be harder to spot, okay? So that type of plagiarism often occurs because either we didn't realize we needed a citation for that, or we didn't know how to cite it. Maybe the writer intended to paraphrase, but was unable to do so correctly and ended up with a plagiarized passage. Or this is a very common one. The writer brought the information into their essay and they intended to go back and put the citations in, but they missed some instances of source use. Excuse me. So one of the things that I will recommend to you right off the bat is cite it as you write it. Don't make the mistake of going back and thinking that you will plug in your citations later, because it's very common that either that does not happen because you run out of time, or you miss some here and there because they weren't clearly marked in your essay. So I always think it's a great idea when you're ready to use information from a source, whatever stage you're at in your draft, go ahead and determine the citation for it right away, the author and the page number or whatever else it might be, and include it in that draft, okay? Now, there is some information that does not need to be cited because it's considered common knowledge. So as it says here in the style book, information is considered common when it is commonly known in its field or it appears in many sources. This is also information that is so basic and factual that pretty much everyone would agree with it. So for example, it's common knowledge that Kurt Vonnegut published Slaughterhouse-Five in 1966. Now, you might not know that off the top of your head. I wouldn't know that off the top of my head. But if I looked it up in a bunch of different sources, it's just a really simple statement of fact, and it's going to say the same thing every time. So I don't need to cite that. You know, another example, stomach pain is a common side effect of aspirin use. This is common knowledge. It's generally true. It's accepted in the field, and it would be really tough to find a source that disagrees. So those don't need to be cited, okay? Great, okay. So do go through and read all of that stuff really thoroughly and let me know if you have any questions. And I wanted to end by talking about penalties for plagiarism. So basically the penalty for plagiarism in my class really depends on the context. So it might just be, you know, me pointing it out to you and maybe knocking a couple points off that you forgot a citation, you know, no big deal. I might ask you to do a rewrite or require you to visit the writing center to talk about plagiarism. You might fail the assignment in a really egregious case, and in super egregious cases, you can actually fail the course. And there may be other disciplinary measures taken by the school if this is something that you've had a problem with before. Now, it's not very common that a student has failed an entire essay or failed the course. It's even less common that they failed the course for plagiarism, but it certainly has happened, and it does happen almost every semester. So what you want to think about instead of, you know, dealing with plagiarism in the first place is how to avoid it. So in a future unit, you will complete a tutorial on Blackboard about just that, about avoiding plagiarism. And the style book also offers us some really great tips that I would like to go over with you. So as I said before, if you're citing from a source, cite it as you write it, use the quotation marks and go ahead and cite it. If you're going to paraphrase, do it thoroughly. Don't use quotation marks and cite it. Cite as you write, as I said before. As you revise and edit your essay, citations are something that you should pay attention to. So double check your quotations for accuracy. Double check your paraphrases that they are thoroughly paraphrased and in your own language and sentence structure. And double check each citation. Did you include the author and the page number for that source if it was available? As I recommended before, keep a hard copy, keep printouts, keep notes on your research process so that if there's ever any question about your intellectual property, you have the proof to back yourself up. And if you're ever in doubt, please feel free to ask me or to ask a writing center tutor, and we'd be very happy to discuss the source use in your essay and how it might be able to be improved. Now, I don't want to go through and read these plagiarism examples to you because it would take forever, but I do strongly recommend that you read them really thoroughly because they're excellent examples of how plagiarism can sometimes be like extremely obvious and punch you right in the face. And sometimes plagiarism can be much more subtle and harder to detect. So that's avoiding plagiarism. If you have any questions, please do contact me, and otherwise we'll continue to talk about this throughout the whole rest of the class. So have a great day and we'll see you soon.